I'm sorry. I use Teams and Google at work, so it'll take me a bit to get used to this. I'm Nikki Morrow. I've been in town about 30 years. I live near the center of town, so I spend a lot of time just walking my dogs around town and seeing how the center of town has changed and how various buildings have popped up and uses going back and forth between buildings. And I joined because I just think it's really time for us to concentrate on the best use of our buildings, especially if we're going to be talking about a community center. My prior experience with the town is I was the chair of the Recreation Commission for a while. I've been on the advisory committee. I was on the cable television committee. And lately my volunteer activity for the town has been helping out with the polls, counting the people who do write-in ballots, all the people who vote for Tom Brady for everything. So that's
Great.
what I've been up to. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm sorry I missed last meeting.
No problem at all. Welcome, happy to have you here. So I guess our first action item for this meeting is approval of meeting minutes from February 16th of 2022. First and foremost, Susan, thank you for taking that task on and providing a draft. I don't know if anyone had any questions or comments for Susan before we have a motion on it.
You did a great job.
Very impressed.
So I just had one clarification. On the second page of them, when we say that we have funding through CPC to hire professionals and architects to do the studies, is capital planning also referred to as CPC, or should we spell that out? Because it's not like the CPA funds.
So it's the reason we renamed it when we made it a standing committee was exactly that issue.
Okay.
So Susan, we should call it CIPC, Capital Improvement Planning Committee.
Okay.
To avoid the exact question that Jen just had.
All right. And then the one line below it said we'd most likely use those that we hired for the rec center previously. I think we meant for this original study, right?
So yeah, I would just say, I think the proper way to phrase it is the space needs study. And I can send you this in email, Susan, if you don't capture it or hear it on the recording. The space needs study was contracted through a designer selection process, which means we have the ability to continue with the existing architect. Otherwise, we would have to go out and basically do a whole selection process all over again.
Okay.
Yep.
So how do you want me to change? So
strike the sentence, we would most likely use those that
Right.
were hired, and replace it with the architects that conducted the space needs study that culminated
okay, got it.
in 2022 were hired under the designer selection statute, which is a very specific state law that allows us to continue with them without doing a procurement process every time we want to continue to expand upon the scope. However, you have the option to get out of it at any point in time. You just have to run a whole new procurement process.
That was my only feedback on it. So, yep.
I have a quick question, and I know I can't vote on these at all, but in section 4, it says review a draft charge and ask select board to alter our charge. What charge are we altering, and what's our draft charge?
So I can provide, so I actually have it's on the agenda under chair update. So the original charge, and I can recirculate it for anyone that didn't have it handy. It's also on our committee webpage. That was what the select board used to kind of constitute all of us. But because when they created the charge, they didn't fill the seats right away. We had deliverables due before we even had our first meeting. So since then, the select board last night amended our charge. We agreed as a committee last time that our initial deliverable would be due no earlier than June of 2023. And they also extended the term of the charge through the end of the calendar year. So December 31, 2023. They obviously have the ability to continue to expand it depending on where we're all going. as part of this.
Okay, so it's the same charge, it's just timing.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Hang on, Pam is duplicated here. Thank you, Ryan, for sending that. The only other thing, Susan, and I can help you offline with this, is we're required to reference any documents that were referenced in the meeting. So I think we actually just need to include a copy of the charge in our, attached to our minutes tonight, like just foreshadowing a little bit. We'll likely have to reference the full study that was circulated, et cetera. And then I think going forward, we may have items that get sent. Like, I don't know, if someone makes a presentation, that would get attached to the minutes and become part of the permanent record. Go ahead, Tim.
Another thing that I found useful in previous times is there's an ability to add line items or line numbers to the file. When we do minutes going forward, we should just try to do that. So when Jason just mentioned what section it was, you could just say line this versus trying to subdivide that whole thing.
Are there any other comments? Awesome job again, Susan. Really helpful. And then just for those that aren't as familiar with open meeting law, if you have individual edits, like especially that are Scribners and not of substance, you're more than welcome to send Susan kind of the track changes ahead of time, and then she can just walk us through. If you have them, otherwise we just do it here. It drags things on, obviously. If typos, etc. But we didn't have any typos, so it was good. All right, so then I will make a motion to approve the minutes with the edits discussed this evening. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Tim. Any further conversation? We have to do a roll call vote on this. Bill?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Nikki?
Abstain.
Pam, can I have you mute? I'm getting some feedback, unfortunately.
Okay. Can you hear me at all?
Now I can.
Okay, I'll mute.
Okay, sorry. Tim?
Yes.
And Jason is yes. Did I get everyone?
I'm a
Susan.
yes.
Yeah.
Do I get to vote
Yeah.
on my minutes? Yes.
You jumped on me. I knew I missed someone. All right, so I counted 601. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Ryan had a scheduling conflict that got resolved since I posted the agenda, but I'm going to respect the order of the agenda and ask that he just provide an update of what he has learned on the Mass Public Library construction program and the actions. And Janet, obviously, feel free to weigh in here as a library board trustee. The actions that the board's planning to take in, because I do think it potentially impacts our work as we go ahead.
So I have like a spiel I can read. That might be better, just so that I don't leave anything out. So I'm gonna kind of apologize. I will try to go really quick, okay? So the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, or MBLC, I'm gonna use a lot of acronyms in this one, recently announced a new round of grant funding that's available through the Massachusetts Public Library Construction Program, or MPLCP. This program has been around for many years, but it has sort of undergone a facelift. It is now kind of streamlined and revised so that libraries who apply and get accepted into this program get the money faster. And part of that has been fueled really by construction costs going exorbitantly up in the period when people apply. They then accepted a number of libraries into the programs, but then waitlisted libraries depending on the priority and the scope of the projects. So what the new revised plan is to accept X number of libraries. They're looking at about 10 in this grant cycle for now, right? The one that's going to come up in the next year. And those libraries would then basically not get waitlisted. They would go for their construction funding in about 4 years from that. So the first step in this process, right? So I will say thank you to Jen and thank you to Susan and thank you to Tim. I know you reached out and I'm sorry, Tim, we didn't get a chance to connect, but you were all so gracious. And Nikki, I'm happy to offer this to you as well, but just to come out and do kind of a tour of the library, and you got my whole like 50 cent, we're running out of space, right? When I showed you all the areas. So I'm happy to continue to do that for anybody. And then, but the first step in this process, sorry, I've deviated, you can tell from my written statements, but is to file a letter of intent by the end of April. So in order to do that, I need the board's permission. And I also need to, I have to have a designated municipal official, which most likely is going to be Mark. So I've had an initial meeting with Mark. I think everybody's kind of focus, right, has been to get through town meeting by the end of this month. So I think this is something we're going to revisit with the select board in April. So I'll probably be going there to let them know that the letter of intent is something we plan to file. Letter of intent with the state doesn't obligate us to participate in the grant round, but if we don't file this letter of intent, we can't participate. The grant application then needs to be filed in May of 2024. So this ends up becoming, it kicks off what will be a year-long process for the library, basically starting a planning and design process to explore 2 sites. We have the option to renovate our existing site, and we have to look at least 1 new site, if not 2 sites. I think that covers all the main points. Right, Janet? I don't want to talk for a long time because there's a lot of nitty-gritty details and there's a lot to cover for this meeting, but that kind of gives you where the library's at. The board supported filing the letter of intent, and that at least gives us the option to participate next year, which I think we probably will.
The only other point of information is that this is this round, and if we don't get accepted this round, the next round is what, 4 years from now, I think. So
yeah, so once the funding for the libraries that get accepted, so that again, they're planning on about 10 roughly. It depends on if libraries with communities of under 2,500, which unfortunately we don't qualify, they're the only group that kind of gets prioritized as part of this, because those libraries are smaller, they're often in further need of disrepair, and they need, the construction need is greater. So those are going to be kind of, they call them like small library construction grants, and we're a standard library construction grant because we're over 2,500. We will have the option to file a letter of intent and to get in on this in the next grant round. This is competitive. And what I can tell you is they said they're going to accept about 10. I can tell you as of this morning, about 50 libraries are interested. That doesn't mean everybody's going to file a letter of intent, and it also doesn't mean everybody's going to file a grant application. So that gives you kind of our chances, at least initially going into this.
the odds are not in our favor.
Is the, have they announced I know it's rounding, Ryan, because there's some points that you get plus or minus based on energy efficiency, et cetera. Is it still in the 40%-ish reimbursement on certain costs, or have they not announced that?
So that I'm still kind of getting all the information on that, Jason. It seems like it's dependent on what type of construction you do. It was closer to like 47-48% in the last round, so it's pretty significant. I did check, because if you do sort of LEED certification and you do kind of more environmentally conscious construction, which, that's something John and I are both kind of committed to. There's additional incentives. Those are still there. So that is something that we'd also try to pursue. I don't think it's more than 50%. I think they would have really hit it if it was higher than that, but it's still a pretty significant amount. There's a training you guys can watch if you're really interested in this, right? But some of the things that they'll fund are like if it's an operational cost, right? So if we have to relocate our septic system, the grant money could pay for that, but it won't pay for paving a parking lot over the septic system. That would have to be on the town's dime. So it's like things like that. There are distinctions on what gets paid for out of the money and what can't be. And then there's certain caps. So it's like once you hit a certain amount on something, no more can be spent.
Oh, no more can be reimbursed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If there are questions for Ryan based on that update. Ryan, maybe, I don't know if this is too obvious or not, and I'll leave it with you and Janet for what you want to do with it. Obviously, I'm sure this group is going to start talking about scenarios of possible iterations, like involving, a lot of user groups, including library, during this cycle, right? Like you're going to file this letter of intent, you're going to anxiously be standing by, then you're going to file your grant application, you're going to be anxiously standing by. And I'm sure everyone else is going to be anxious to be moving forward, right? And we know that the school at the same time will be advancing into that next round based on where we're at. Is there any, I guess what I want to know going forward, if there's any do's and don'ts for the community, like if we go to a certain step with some of our planning, like do we punt ourselves out of the process? Or the flip side, if we can do some work on our dime now to be better prepared for the grant cycle, do we have a leg up given the 50 or so communities you're going to be competing against? It's a pretty loaded question, I know, but I just want to make sure we don't jeopardize your path forward, but at the same time respect, obviously, others are going to want to be moving at the same time.
Oddly, I think this committee might be more helpful than we may have initially thought, because this is all timing, right? I didn't know when this committee was formed that we were going to be in a grant cycle. I didn't know at the beginning of February we we're going to be in a grant cycle. Like that's how quickly this has sort of come up. What was going to be difficult, Jason, was identifying a secondary site other than renovating the existing library. And I think it's clear that we would like to try to look at the existing site and look at what can be done. I mean, that was kind of noted in the, the plans from the architect, right, as well. But to satisfy the grant, we have to have at least one other option. So, I mean, Woodward or the townhouse are two potential options that we have to explore. In talking with other town officials about a secondary site that isn't one of those locations, we'd be looking at probably an abandoned area in Route 9. There's not a lot of places to do new construction in Southborough where a new library could be built.
Understood.
To be direct. Yeah.
No, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Is there currently a deed restriction on the property the library's on that it has to be a library?
Ryan, well, let me take that because I have an update. There's a lot of competing theories. Capital Planning had asked town council, so it was Jay Tallerman's firm, for a formal legal opinion in and around the time that we were getting the feedback last year on the space needs. We got something, but it was not conclusive. So I put in a request after our last meeting to Mark, and because all town council requests have to go through him. I put in a request that once they get through town meeting, that either Jay Tallerman or their designee from the firm come to one of our meetings. And I think the library board needs to be part of that too. Like it should be a joint meeting, and or they provide a formal legal opinion of what can and cannot be done with that building going forward. Because the one thing I think we all can agree to is CPA funds preserve the facade of that building 4 or 5 years ago at this point. So that building's not going anywhere. So it's just a matter of how can we use it if by chance a library wasn't going to be situated there in the future state. So
Okay, so there is some ambiguity that it might be deed restricted or restricted to being a library going forward, and that could be something that we would have to find out, and will find out in this process.
Yes.
Janet and I are currently working diligently, if not speedily, on because we've also worked with representatives that are part of the firm from town council on a preservation restriction, which was one of the sort of package deals with using the CPA money for facade restoration. That language isn't going to specify the use of the building, only that the historic facade needs to be preserved. I got a copy of the old deed. It was written in the 1800s. It reads that way. So I think that's part of why maybe we didn't get, I think they're going to have to investigate. Land was donated from the Joseph Burnett estate to the town for the property to be used as a library. So I don't know if that's building specific. I don't know if it's property specific. Those are the questions that we kind of need to ask. I will say the part that needs to be preserved at the library, Southborough Library is etched in stone. So if this building becomes something else, there will be confusion from current and future residents, right? So a similar thing happened in Hudson, New Hampshire, where like the original site of the library, they built a new one next to a school, which was very great for all the students in the school, right? But the first time I went to go meet somebody there, I went to the old location and they were telling me that happens at least 5 times a day. So, you know, there's a couple things to think about there.
Understood. So Tim, I think more to come. I wish it was clearer, but I think the history is obviously what makes it vague at this point.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ryan on that agenda topic?
I don't know if you said this, but is there a confidence level that you have about what our positioning could be to get this grant? Like, is it super competitive? Is it a shot in the dark here, or is it like something that we think we have an actual good solid chance?
To be honest, I think we have a good solid chance. We've made our intentions with the state known for quite a while. I know that I think at one point when Jason was kind of early in his tenure in Capitol, I know you talked to some of the MBLC construction specialists. So they know that there was other interested parties in town. You know, a number of our trustees over the years have interfaced with the MBLC staff. We had Lauren Stara, who's one of the construction specialists, come a number of years ago and talk to the trustees. So, you know, I don't think all of the interested libraries, I know I said 50 and that sounds bad, but I don't think all of those libraries are going to file a letter of intents. And beyond that, I don't think a lot of them are ready to go with a construction grant, even with the over year amount of time that they're going to have to put it together. This is something they were talking about in my interview. Like there's been an appetite, I think, it was really a previous iteration of the board, sans Marguerite Landry, right? But people have talked about spatial needs at the library for the last decade. So honestly, Tim, I think our chances are pretty good. Almost all of our area neighbors have been renovated. Marlborough is currently constructing like a brand new state-of-the-art library. If you've been to Shrewsbury, it was pretty impressive what they did over there. Grafton just got a new one. So a lot of our area neighbors are getting renovated, and we are now the smallest and most out-of-date library. So I think that's going to be kind of a factor in the decisions that the state makes.
And to this as well, town meeting has an item coming up that would be a land swap deal. And if that would go through, would there be any opportunity for that land to be helpful for any extra library plans or addition there? You know, would that be taken into account? I guess is my question. Would that be taken into account with this proposal that you're working on? If that land would be swapped and could be applied to the library parcel for any future renovation?
There have been no discussions at this point about it. I know that there has been some talk about us utilizing that as an outdoor programming area because our current space is not ideal for that. And there are some ADA concerns about kind of plopping a kid's story time on top of our septic hump behind the library, which is kind of where we do outdoor story times in the summer. So, I think if a park area gets built, we were looking at maybe, could we utilize that space for story times? I don't know about construction. It is pretty far away from the building. I don't think the building could kind of be moved, right? I think that might,
Yeah,
I
I
can't
was
see that
thinking more-
happening. Yeah.
I was thinking more parking lot or something else that would help support infrastructure needs that you would have. I don't know how big the library parcel itself is to usability with a renovation. So when I visit you, I guess it'll be helpful to have some more context.
I mean, I can tell you in our strategic plans, parking comes up as a repeated issue because during summer reading, during any large scale library events, we run out of parking very quickly. So that is something that in a renovation, we want to explore more parking. And I don't know where people would go. Like we already utilize a lot of the library parcel for parking currently. But to answer your question, there haven't been any conversations about using that specific property as part of a future library project. I think the trustees and I would be open to having that conversation. But again, I think we kind of need to see where things fall at the next town meeting, potentially. Right now, I think there's a proposal to do a park there. So that's, if that is what happens, we would utilize that potentially for the library if it's an option to us.
All right, let's move on to the next item. So I think I already covered the chair and members update to answer Nikki's question on the charge. So that's been updated, it's in effect. The next item is questions on review of the historic data and presentations to capital planning. So I did share the video as well as the full report and then some supplemental attachments in there. So my guess is 5 and 6 will start to blend themselves together, but I just wanted to see if there was any questions on what everyone had received before we kind of go into more user feedback and understanding, in particular, library, recreation, and council on aging's initial views on potential paths forward. I think we've heard a little bit from library, but I'm sure Janet and Ryan have some more to say. So I guess let's start with questions. So were there any questions coming out of what folks saw?
I have a question about, and there was a lot to go through, so I don't know if it was somewhere else in there, but why option 2 was considered not valid. And I was trying to find out because it looked very similar to one of them, and I wasn't sure why it was immediately discarded.
Let me open it up. I'm just trying to remember which one that was.
That was the one still using the South Union building. And
That
at the
was-
time, we were putting it on the market, so.
Okay.
I think it's fair to say that there's no intention that that building remains in its current use, with the goal of upgrading the space for both departments, recreation and youth and family, that currently occupy that space. There certainly can be questions as we go for, I should probably just preface this. You'll likely have many questions as we continue to go on some of this, but I just wanted to get preliminary stuff out. Sorry, I cut someone off.
Sorry, I was just gonna ask, is there a requirement to get the, what is it, the regional school offices out of Neary? Or is there a potential they could stay in Neary with whatever that new design looks like?
It's certainly not a requirement. However,
Okay.
anything we do there will be 100% funded by the town of Southborough. There'd be no MSBA reimbursement. However, there is plenty of space at Trotter that you could easily
Okay, so they
transition
could go
that.
somewhere else. Okay,
So, well, the main goal with the school administration was to try to co-locate with town officials to try to create synergies between positions, but was not the user group we were focused on trying to solve a space need for.
Okay, that's what I was curious. And any reason why they would not go to space in Northborough?
We actually get some really good rent.
Oh, okay.
From it. Northborough does not have any space.
Okay.
And everyone realizes Northborough's preschoolers actually go to Finn as well. So it's not just
Yes.
school administration. So I would say my personal opinion is we wouldn't certainly build space to accommodate both towns. However, if we have existing space that can be repurposed, because they occupy about 6 to 7 classrooms right now at Neary, they didn't like retrofit the space other than some dividers. So if anyone's actually been in Neary, in that space, it could be returned to a classroom tomorrow if they really needed it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions at this point? Again, if something comes up down the road, just don't hesitate to bring it up. And I'm sure our natural discussion will elicit some of those questions or history lessons.
Jason, what side is the gym on Woodward? Is it the south side or the north side?
South. It's on the public safety side.
Okay.
In the rear of the building. So
Yeah.
the cafeteria is in the front, the gym is in the back. And I am getting some dates and times from the superintendent and assistant superintendent that people can walk through that space as well, that haven't been through it. All right. So item 6 on the agenda, I kind of teed this up last time, but obviously this isn't going to be the only time to do this, but I think it was important that obviously we have 3 representatives that are from boards or commissions or committees that have a stake in this, and they have taken various positions or had various feedback. I think some is unanimous, some is split on terms of paths forward. So I'll let the 3 of them and obviously their employee ex officio representatives decide who's going to go first. But I think it's just really helpful for those of us that are more in an at-large position to just hear where you were at on the space needs, what your thoughts were, and what you view as the right path forward, and what you're hoping, obviously, all of us can kind of help bring a consensus to, obviously trying to bring a overall financial lens to this at the end of the day, that not everyone's going to get a new facility and build independent facilities. So just trying to figure out how to mix and match as best as possible, but obviously with a focus on solving your user groups, immediate and longer term concerns. So who wants to go first?
I'll go,
Go ahead, Bill.
unless Tim wants to go. And as the same as Ryan did, I have a prepared statement that I'd like to make so that I don't miss any of the points that we brought up at our meetings. So from a council on aging perspective, I would like to begin by emphasizing the fact that over the next 7 years, the percentage of our senior center population will have reached 30% of the overall population in the town. Currently, the senior center services approximately 1,000 different seniors for a wide variety of activities and services. This usage could easily more than double by the year 2030. First, the Council on Aging voted unanimously to not support the use of Woodward School as a community center that would include the senior center. The Council on Aging has visited the Woodward School and for the following reasons found that as a building has a layout and a site that is not appropriate for the needs of a well-functioning senior center. The building site sits on a small hill. To be ADA compliant, it requires a 100-foot ramp from the current street level parking to reach the front access, which is difficult at best for seniors dealing with mobility issues. The lower parking lot presents additional challenges due to another elevation rise. The rear parking area is minimal, and adding additional ground level space would be difficult, limited, and expensive to implement. Being designed as a school, the internal layout does not easily lend itself to large-scale, costly modifications that would be required to meet the needs of a well-functioning community center. The current facility has a classroom layout and also has an institutional feeling. This is not the inviting, comfortable environment that is essential for a well-designed senior center. For many seniors, the senior center is their second home. They need a comfortable place with some areas being welcome, quiet, and relaxed. The dining, function hall, and gym facilities are on a different level from the senior center main activity area, resulting in a disconnected flow to the overall senior center facility. There is very limited appropriate outside space for activities such as a patio area, barbecues, lawn sports, and the raised gardens. Having outside space for events is very important for seniors during the months when it is possible. Many seniors often stay indoors, and it is our goal to encourage more outdoor activities. The community center relies on the use of many shared facilities such as the gym, function hall, exercise rooms, and some activity room. To work well, these areas need to be available to seniors during the day and the remainder of the population from late afternoons, evenings, and weekends. It has been intimated that this schedule will not work well with the recreation department, since particularly during the summer and during school vacations and other various times, they would also require the use of many of these shared facilities. And as the senior population increases and becomes more active group, it is reasonable to assume that the senior center may wish to extend its hours to later in the day and the evening. Secondly, the Council on Aging also voted unanimously to recommend a dedicated standalone facility for the senior population of Southborough. The COA short-term plans are to complete the long-anticipated renovations to the front of the current building, which would include much-needed lounge area and an additional activity room. These plans have been delayed for several years, and construction is now scheduled to begin this summer. We'll see. The long-term plans would be to be an enlarged standalone senior center. And there are at least two scenarios to this option. Just as a matter of history, in 2006, the town meeting voted $375,000 for a design construction supervision contract for a senior center at our current location. After consideration by the design committee, it was determined that it was more cost-effective to tear the existing facility down and start fresh. Then, after spending about $200,000 on the design budget on a new building design, the estimated cost of over $2 million for the project was considered too much, and the whole project was scrapped. The first scenario is a wholesale renovation of the current facility, utilizing the whole building as a senior center. I'm emphasizing the whole building. One major consideration when planning to build or rebuild on the present very desirable, well-suited location would be how and where to put the senior center function during this construction period. The second scenario would be to find a new location and build from scratch. In any case, the facility needs to be well designed by an architect with senior center design experience. There are many small things that contribute greatly to a smooth functioning senior center that only a firm experienced with senior center design would think to incorporate. The facility should include such amenities that are very basic to a well-designed senior center, many of which we are lacking in our current facilities, such as a full kitchen, cafe, lounging area, exercise room, adequate storage, and just like Tim said, adequate storage space and adequate office space. In terms of spatial needs, adequate senior centers in the surrounding area serving relatively the same size population as South Row has a square footage of about 14,000 square feet. We are currently at 6,000 square feet, less than half. Given the fact that our senior population is anticipated to double by the year 2030, a larger facility does not seem out of the question. So in summary, and given the above, one, the COA unanimously does not support the Woodward School as a senior center, and two, the Council on Aging voted unanimously to recommend a standalone senior center. That's the end of our report. I'd also like to emphasize that we would really like to have you people tour our senior center, particularly those who haven't been there and are not familiar with just the services and activities that we perform there, because it's really an outstanding job by Pam and her staff, what we do for the seniors in a very confined, not too appropriate facility that we have now, but we make it work. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Pam, anything you want to add before I open it up to questions?
I just wanted to let everybody know a little bit of the history. As Ryan mentioned, like years ago, there was some plans for the library, or at least talked about plans for the library. And the same goes for the senior center. 20 years ago, when I started, we were looking at, actually in my interview, they said, oh, we're gonna have a new senior center over on Central Street. We started there, with architectural plans for that building. All kinds of things happened with that. Probably fortunate that that didn't happen, because it would have been way too small, with railroad tracks in the back and Fayetteville AA and all kinds of things. There's a lot of reasons why that wouldn't work. So we went from there. The building was in real tough shape at the time, and we moved to an office building on Corderville Road over kind of near the transfer station. So we operated out of there. Then the town purchased the current property, and we kind of retrofit in there. Some people were in what was the kitchen, something was a meeting room that's now our kitchen. So we did a lot of different things to retrofit in there. And then kind of continued to where Bill alluded to. There was another set of plans that was done by the town to kind of work on, I don't know, really, it started out as a senior center, maybe a community center, and ended up with town offices. And the economy was not good at that point, and it was expensive, and everything, it kind of backed off. So we've been through a lot of different things. And the other, I don't know if people have time to do this, but if you took a look at the Northborough Senior Center, it's a good example of, it has all of the elements that we would love to have. And kind of to reiterate what Ryan said, if you look at our surrounding towns, they either have complete renovated buildings or they have new facilities. So, we basically do what we do to make ourselves function really well. And we do a lot of offsite types of things to bring everybody the programs and activities that we need. But it would be great to have, a new place, or a place that was renovated that had all the elements that we were looking for. So that's, if you guys have any questions, it's been a long process and a lot of thought into what we would really like. That's what the Council on Aging, what they voted on, is what would be ideal.
So I have a bunch of questions. I'm gonna go at the end. I guess, does anyone else have questions for Bill or Pam based on the statement that Bill read?
So, Bill, you're saying your recommendation from that letter is the current senior center as it stands is not at all sufficient the way it would be, and despite adding that room, the desire would be to knock that building down and rebuild it as a well-intentioned senior center.
Yeah, right now it's, well, I like to refer to it as an old shoe. It's an old building and it's not appropriately designed for what it's being used for. We have offices that you have to walk through somebody's office to get to another office. What we call the kitchen at the moment is more of a caterer's kitchen. It's a big counter, and we have caterers come in and provide the meals and we serve them. We cannot serve meals. Almost all of the senior centers in this area have a kitchen where they can serve meals, some of them daily, to the seniors. And that's the seniors' meal is that. The room we have now is quote unquote the kitchen, is the hallway from the back door and the hallway from the front door. And it is not appropriate for being what it is. And it also is our lounge area. So a person sitting to watch the TV is sitting right in the way of people moving in and out of the building. The function hall has been redone, and it's in pretty good shape. We have a new sound system, air conditioning, movable walls, so we can divide it up into thirds rather than one total room. So we've done a lot to try and retrofit it, but there's a lot of things, as I mentioned, that we don't have that other senior centers in our area do have. And we really need to address that issue going forward. And it's really time that we did it. As Pam said, we've been trying to find a really good, up-to-date facility for the 20 years she's been here.
Okay, so
I do think.
sorry,
Sorry.
my question, my bearing straight on this, the question that I have, and I'm trying to make sure I got a consolidated answer, is you said Woodward School is not something that you guys, the Council on Aging, want. The current building would want to be knocked down, and there's really no path to renovating the current building unless you got the entire thing, and then it would need extensive renovation to be fully functional and usable as a senior center.
True. Yes.
Okay, got it.
We like the location. The location is great, as you would imagine, right in the center of town, easily accessed. But the building itself is inappropriate for what we're using it for. So we could do a very major renovation, and take over more of the building. There's a lot of building there, but at midnight we lost the whole downstairs. There was a kitchen downstairs. We couldn't use it because it was a stairway down, and ADA compliancy said that we couldn't go downstairs, and elevators are extremely expensive. So it just would need major renovation, or like that study that we did in 2006 said, easier to tear it down and start again. If you ever were downstairs in the old part of that building, it's nothing but a tangle of pipes and wires and everything that's been strung up there for the last 100 years. So it's a building that's outlived its usefulness.
Bill,
Tell you what you need, Tim.
That's exactly what I needed. Thank you. I was just trying to make sure I had a consolidated response of what you read and make sure that I fully understood the three options that you did say.
I'd love to have you come over and take a look at it sometime.
Yeah, we would love to have you guys take a look at it. I think if you see it, you'll kind of see what we're talking about. And like I said, either maybe we can get some pictures or some things together for some of the surrounding senior centers, so you can kind of see where we'd like to be in some kind of a combination of some of the new elements mixed in with that kind of comfortable feeling. We make it work, is what we're doing now. And with the new addition on the front of the building, that will improve it. And that'll give us a little more space, but without doing kind of a real major renovation of it, we wouldn't be able to add those elements like a cafe or a place where people could come and have lunch every day and congregate. And the activity space, it's a big room with big dividing walls. Again, we make it work. Everything is, I have to tell you, everything is growing. I mean, today they just came to me and said, our chair yoga class is busting at the seams. It has, 28 people in it. I don't know. I mean, the baby boomer thing is real. I kind of said, oh yeah, it's coming, but it's here. And people are just coming through the door in big numbers. And, for the town to deal with it appropriately, down the road, hopefully we'll have some changes.
And I'll just add, is that site is incredibly small. Remember, every site in town needs to have septic. So I'm not passing an opinion, Phil, on your 14,000. But if I just accept it at face value, I'm not sure, and I'm not an architect, I'm not sure how you fit 14,000 square feet on that site and have the right amount of parking that you're going to need. So something we can discuss as we go forward. Like even if you did knock it down, start all over, your site is quite limited to work with. So that's going to lead to some of my questions later, but I want to pass that fact on. Tim, are you good with your questions from COA?
Can I say one more thing about that? There's no reason we couldn't have a 2-level senior center. It would just necessitate having an elevator. And many, many senior centers have elevators.
But don't forget about the parking spots.
True.
The more square footage you have, it's going to dictate more spots. But I hear you. That's a more efficient use of land.
What's the square footage that's not being used right now in the building that is taken up by other departments?
What is it? Is that what you asked him?
The total square footage.
Yeah, there is an amount of square footage in the building not currently being utilized by the senior center for other purposes. So my question was, what is that amount of square footage? Because if it's 14,000 and it adds up to 14,000, then it's already, the building's pretty close to what it would be if not the number mentioned the ideal.
The floor that we're on is 6,000 square feet. The floor below us is much less than that. It's probably less than half of that. And the floor above is, I don't know what we could do with that. That's a bunch of little small rooms up there. So that wouldn't be too much help. Unless we put the offices up here, maybe.
All I'm thinking is there's less disparity. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off either. There's less disparity probably between your 14,000 number and what the building has capacity for currently without modification. That was my bigger question.
9,958 square feet per the assessor.
What'd you say? I missed that, Jason.
Call it 10,000 to round it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Plus the planned addition that's currently supposed to start this summer.
How much is that? That's about 20 by 30. That's about 600, 700 square feet.
Okay.
So Tim, remember, it's not an ADA accessible building. So
correct.
You don't have to consider is hallways would be wider, every space would be wider. So just something we can talk about more. Susan, I saw your hand up for a while, so I wanted to get to you.
Most of it was actually answered. I was asking about whether or not you could fit the 14,000 square feet on the current site as it is, even if Board of Health and the other places did move out. So kind of all just talked about all of that. So it's interesting to think what that site could be used for if it can't support the optimal senior center site.
Are there other questions?
I have a question. If we're, instead of constraining our thoughts to the buildings that exist and the places that exist, the locations that exist, I was struck by your comment that you want a standalone senior center. But if we were to build a building someplace else that was acceptable aren't there other departments that you'd be willing to share with? I'm thinking rec commission for the open space, the exercise rooms, all of those kind of things. aren't there any things that that would be acceptable to be joined in if it was a bigger plan?
Up until recently, the Council on Aging was very open to a community center. If you could build an ideal community center with the common areas being shared, yes, I think that would be great. We looked at a couple of places. There's not a lot of them around that are built that way or built properly. The ones we looked at were built years ago, and there were some that were, there was one in particular that was really good. It had 2 wings to it. The common areas were in between. So you had a separation of space where you needed it, and you had the common areas being shared where you needed it too. But that being said, it would have to be kind of the ideal setup and done really meaningfully, from the beginning. And I think that would absolutely be possible if you did it that way. The problem with Woodward is you're kind of, again, trying to refit into a kind of a situation. If you could take Woodward and gut it or gut portions of it, that would be great, and redesign it. But I think that would be really, really expensive to do that. So
And take it off the till, put it down on a lower level.
Yeah, ideally that was kind of where everybody stood up until fairly recently. Like, yeah, where especially like recreation, we work kind of different hours, and the user groups kind of work somewhat different, different hours. And but yeah, in a perfect world, a standalone senior center. But yeah, it's possible. But I would hope if the town went forward with that, it would be done in a really thoughtful, meaningful way to fit the needs of both of the groups.
Right. There's no other reason to do it if it's not going to meet the needs of the groups.
Right.
You'll
Okay.
find that most of the towns around this area do not have community centers. They have standalone senior centers, and for a good reason.
Could you say that again? They don't
say
have standalone?
Most of the surrounding towns have standalone
Oh, they
senior
do.
centers,
Yes. Okay.
not community centers.
Okay. I'm just
I
thinking the
think
neighbor committee is, investigating community centers. So just thinking a little broader.
Yeah, Natick has a big one, and it was built to be a community center from scratch. So other than that, I don't know of any community centers that include a senior center in this area.
Thank you.
Any other questions for COA? Bill, I'm just gonna I have one statement and then 2 very quick questions.
Sure.
The statement is actually just in reference to how you responded to one of Jan's questions. Woodward would be gutted if it was used in a community center, right? So I know it's really hard to imagine because we all saw the walls up and like, for example, Tim, the gym would not be gutted, right? Like there'd probably be, but like
I
most
can
of
believe
those
that.
walls are going to come down and be orchestrated. But I think just to help you make your point, I think your bigger concerns, at least from what I remember, were the access, right? You talked about the ADA, you talked about the ramp, you talked about the grading. I think you could tailor the space to however you want it. If you had, let's just say you had first dibs on how to do it, but I don't want to lose sight of, I think your bigger issue is the access restrictions, not how you would configure a building, because you'd have more than 14,000 square feet in that.
Let me ask you this question, Jason. Maybe you know the answers, but you have us on the first floor of the wing, but that first floor is all classrooms, and all the walls in all those classrooms are holding up the second floor. Now, if you start pulling some of those walls out to make some bigger areas, which we really, what you see in a lot of senior centers is when you come in the entrance of that senior center, there is a reception desk. There's a very welcoming area with lounging and so forth. And so you have an open space that's many hundred square feet. And I don't see us pulling out classroom walls without and jeopardizing the ceiling coming down.
That's why they have structural engineers. So I'm not going to pretend to be one. All I know is in at least the as far as capital planning got it, that was what was going to happen. There's certainly beams that can move, and there's other beams that can't move, right? And you would build around that, and it's a modern building, so they know where everything is. They have good blueprints of it. So, but it's a moot point if right, the vote at least that you've taken to date. That's what I'm just trying to ferret out a little bit, because you know, I'm sure we're going to hear something very similar from Janet and Jen, right? Of, you know, their need, right? And I just like, I think we just need to acknowledge, like, as we move forward, and I realize everyone has to start with like, this is what we want, this is what we need, and we're going to, you know, toe a hard line. But nothing is going to get done if we don't make, each group is going to have to make some concessions along the way, including the schools, by the way, right? When they look at whatever they're going to do with NERI to try to fit this all together. So I just would ask everyone, as we keep going, right, to keep an open mind. I understand where you're at now. I understand the position of COA. I obviously lived it, breathed it as the capital planning representative, but it leads me to my next question is, if not Woodward, you referenced Northborough. And if I've got my bearings right on Northborough geography, their senior center could not be any further away from like anything going on in that town. It's borderline in Shrewsbury, right? If I've got my, right, it's over by the Solomon Pond Mall.
Yes.
Correct, yep.
Okay. So how important is location, like central location to you, as compared to just getting the right facility? Like, how do you rate that? And is like it 95% it has to be like our 14,000 square foot standalone facility, and 5% of it's nice, it's in the center of town? Or like, because I think it helps us use our creative juices of where we go with this.
I think the percentages are a little strong, but I think the idea is right. That to have a really good senior center, if we have to move it to the outskirts of our town, it would be worth the effort to move it.
Okay.
Yeah, Jason,
Needless to say, Northborough is a very successful senior center because it has a very good facility, even though they had to move it out of town to get that facility. It was the trade-off they made, and I think that's a trade-off we'd make if we had to. And our town isn't as big as Northborough, so it wouldn't be so far out of town, Jason.
Understood. And these, sorry, Pam, do you have something?
yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, the council felt that they needed to kind of take a stance based on the information that we have currently. That doesn't mean it's, you know, carved in stone forever. If there's better ideas or things come along, you know, I absolutely think they're open for discussion. But based on the information that they had now, they kind of wanted to kind of just verbalize where they stood based on this currently.
Okay. No, I get it. That's where I would start if I like were representing a constituent group. My final question, and Bill, I don't expect you to answer this, but it's something I would like to at least hear. I don't know if the other committee members would want to hear it. Is I get the standalone facility request, but let's just envision, I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical that was churning through my head as you were speaking. Let's just say we find the way to get most of the senior center needs met on the current site, and we get it 90% of what you need, but like we don't have enough space for a commercial kitchen, for example. We all know there's a really good one right across the street with ample assembly space for your larger events, right? Do you need a commercial kitchen? This is an example every day, or for certain things that are like one-off, nice to have, but there's other community groups that would benefit from the space too, well beyond your group. Would you be open to, I'll call it some co-location, have your core needs met in your existing infrastructure, but your really nice to haves that you need to use, but others are going to benefit from, could they be somewhat geographically close with the right ADA accommodations met?
Yeah, that's a question we need to cogitate about just a little bit, but I just know that many of the surrounding senior centers, that's their focal point, is a good kitchen where they can serve meals, some of them daily, some of them 2 or 3 times a week. So it is a vital point, a vital part of any good senior center is the kitchen and the ability to prepare meals. And
If we were to, I think I know what you're asking. I guess if we were going to put a lot of money into the building that we're currently in, I would like it to be ideal. If somebody came for lunch, then they could go to an activity, then they could sit and watch TV or, socialize with their friends. It would, could we retrofit into a situation like that if we had no choice? Yes. We make it work to the best we possibly can. If that's how it came about and that was our only option, yeah, we would make it work. But it's not, it wouldn't be ideal. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else for COA for now? All right. Jen and Janet, who wants to
thank
go?
you, Jason.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, let Jen. Library talked enough.
All right, well then, Kim or Tim, do you want to kick off for us? I'll pass the buck to you to start.
Yeah. So I think it's there's two ways of looking at it in my perspective. One, looking at an outside building that's already existing or looking at other buildings to retrofit ourselves into is almost at a necessity, understanding that the town wants to sell our current and not knowing where we're going to land. No real talk has come of that. So there's the viewpoint of saying, oh, this is great, because we don't want to end up back at Flag School or something like that and have all of our space completely ripped out from underneath us. So, speaking of Woodward specifically, yes, you dangle a gymnasium in front of us. We're going to get excited about it. Larger programming space that, we talked about, like the library area and the offices and rooms that go out of it. It's wonderful. And I'll say that it's an exciting idea to be able to gain that, not only that amount of space, but that option of space with the gymnasium. And again, a larger programming room, a little more up to date, a little more modernized. But kind of some of the downfalls, I think, is what Bill mentioned on, is that, when we think of our programming needs, yes, it's after school programming. So, a lot of the stuff may take place more after work hours or into the work hours. So not the big bulk of the day. But when we look at our larger programming, like summer camp, that's currently houses Woodward, and even the after school programs in general, we're talking about hundreds of kids that are now taking over that building, whether it be during the week or over the summer. And then we'll be commingling with groups of individuals that it may not be the safest to put them together. There are different options that were put out with Woodward, different separation concerns of our rooms are scattered, concerns about storage, just because South Union, almost the entire first floor is storage for us. And what was presented, if I remember thinking back, one of our biggest concerns was storage in general. So I think off the top of my head, those were some of the biggest things of, yes, the idea of it is attractive, especially again with the gymnasium, that library space, kind of the whole atrium piece of it, of that side of the building, the cafeteria, the kitchen, things of that nature. But when we think about scheduling and we think about sharing the space, whether it be with the seniors, but also just general town staff, disruption and us being disruptive to others, was a kind of a big concern with that. I feel like Bill, you really set the bar high with a prepared speech here, buddy. You're kind of killing me. But I mean, the other piece too is, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, South Union works for us, and it does as it is now. I know Susan and Tim were over there kind enough to make the visit, and yes, that building needs a good amount of work. No one's denying that. But the use works for us where it is now. Yes, we're packed out. Yes, it's busy. Yes, we would always want more space. But again, knowing that area or that space is potentially going to be sold off kind of forces our hand to look what the other options are out there. Now, if I had a preference, obviously, just like Bill, I'd want to start from scratch and a standalone. I mean, we did that years and years and years ago. We have plans. They're not the most detailed, but it was put on the table up behind Public Works of utilizing that land and building from the ground up with a gymnasium and common areas and playground and kind of all encompassing area. So, in a perfect world, obviously, we'd want our own center. I do think that we could work it out with a senior, a multi-generational, the key word lately of building something that would work for both. But obviously the concerns and the big conversations would have to be with our bigger program seasons and our bigger times of usage, to making sure that everything would fit with a neighbor that we would share the building with. And Jen, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I mean, I guess the commission hasn't technically taken a vote on this. We did discuss it when this study was going on and reviewed it. But at the time, we weren't exactly sure what the next steps were or what was going to happen. So we didn't technically vote on this. I think it was shared sentiment that, the building's intriguing, but we'd want more free reign of it, right? To be able to do all these things and not interfere with other people. I know we've been trying to solve or think through with Tim, like, what do we do about the summer program? Because he keeps upping the attendance that's allowed. And we sold out this week in like 5 minutes. From the time it went live, it sold out in 5 minutes, and Tim's got huge wait lists. So having like more of that space to like flex and take over more space is really appealing. But yeah, I agree. And I think some of the questions are, I think like someone at an EDC made a comment once to us that we should be looking at some of the buildings along Route 9 or space along Route 9 and seeing what options those are. We never pursued that any further, I think, because this also was starting to spin up as well. But we've been noodling it, but also want to make sure that when we get kicked out of South Union, that there is a solution that works and Tim's not sitting in a closet somewhere, right? And having some sort of path forward, because the department has made great strides over the last 4 years, really growing the programming and the investment there, and would hate to like lose space and have to step back on some of those things. So
I think just one thing I'll add in there is you got to remember that if there's additional space that becomes available at Woodward or somewhere else, you also are going to have a brand new or fully renovated school that like is an option for your programs in the summer too. Obviously, you'd have to negotiate that with the school administration,
Right.
but just something to keep in mind is that would be part and parcel with some of this too, right? If
Yeah,
Woodward stays
I
an
think-
option, I know no one wants it, right? Because no one wants, like, I get it, no one wants to share yet, but and it's a valid concern, right?
So,
Especially with the
the
kids.
one challenge also though is that the Southborough Extended Day, which is now part of the schools, uses NERI in that facility. So we do, I mean, like, probably rightfully so, but rec would take second choice to wherever they land their own program too. So we compete with that, friendly competition with that program as well.
Yeah. And Jason, I'll just push back. I'll push back slightly, just because we public perception, we're in the schools and stuff like that, but it's not easy. It's not easy to secure the space. And
I know it's not, but the eternal optimist in me says that you could use this potentially as an opportunity. Everyone wants something, right? So it's a good way to get at the table and get some, like, you're putting very valid concerns on the table, just my own personal opinion, that obviously they're going to want a school. You all want something, right? So I think it's something that will hopefully force a more broad conversation, because I don't really believe in competition amongst town departments. Just my own personal 2 cents, but go ahead, Tim.
Tim, you mentioned major renovations when you talked about it, but when I toured it with you, major wasn't necessarily the words that were said. It was more like roof, some windows, and some mini splits. The biggest single item would be a new boiler, because that one's at end of life. But it wasn't necessarily major as we walked around. So would you stick by major, or would you say that it would just involve some investment to make the building stay functional for what it needs to be and has been?
I think there's 2 ways to look at. When we talked, yes, I think there's some investment needed to keep it functioning, to keep it running adequately. If we go into the nitty-gritty of everything, like in some areas like the bathrooms and stuff like that, there's holes in the ceiling and people are upstairs, the ceiling falls down when you're in the bathroom, kind of sprinkles on you. So, stuff like that. So I think there's major components I think we can look at, but I think you know, I don't want to say minor, but lower level, I think, investment to just keep it functioning properly and safely for everybody that's using the building.
So I also believe like that when like I'm lost for words, but like our like building management, right? Like all of the windows are super old and drafty, and like there's been talk about like they all really should be replaced in the upcoming years. So I think it's not necessarily like what like in the next year or two, but like we start looking 5 years out, there's a huge financial investment, and that's why the town wants to get it off the books and not have to make that investment in that building.
In the next 2 fiscal years, there's about $1 million of capital improvements that are scheduled on South Union, some of which should have happened 2 years ago, that are just to keep the building functioning and running. It's the shell. It has nothing to do with any programs or any departments or any improvements to make their life easier. It's just to keep the building open.
Yeah.
So you can
that
define
building,
major or not.
and that building was put up for bid, right? Just to keep track of like where kind of we are. Put up for bid, garnered an offer of $21,000 on 4 acres of land, and the town rejected it, right?
No, it was $750,000, and the individual withdrew the bid before the select board took any action on it or took it to town meeting. It then led to the formation of a subcommittee to examine whether it could be used for affordable housing. That was a major component of the bidders' plans as well. That group is making a presentation to the select board in the near term. I don't know a date yet, but it was a decent. I think you can consider 750, a decent amount. I think the 21, I could be wrong, was the original Fayetteville Hall situation like 5 or 6 years ago, which is
Yeah.
obviously a different building.
It was Fable.
I have a question about recreation, and maybe you discussed this last meeting, but I understand how you have to maintain your offices and need more office and decent office space. What's your priority in terms of recreation programming? Because if we have a community center, right, it's not going to be just children. Even if it's not the seniors, there's still going to be people coming through all the time. So right now it's in schools which have, their own security. But is your priority to have like a separate facility for children's activities and programming, or what are your priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think in an ideal world, we would be looking to bring more of those after school programming pieces in-house, just because, as we kind of mentioned, we fight for space. We every 5-6 weeks our space resets. We don't know what we're getting. Sometimes we get more, sometimes we get less. So as we go through the year, kind of ebbs and flows on what we're able to do. So having access to our own space to be consistent, I think looking for consistency of after school programming for children, but also expanding, our programming to adults that, we've been doing slowly with the space that we have where we are now. Summer camp to summer camp, that could, I'm indifferent. I'd love to bring it in-house just because we don't have to worry about custodians and different fees that build up over time by using the schools. But at the same time, recognize that sometimes the school setting may be better for camps like that. But ideal situation would be to bring more programming for more consistent scheduling inside for kind of all generations of individuals.
Jason, you mentioned that there was space available at Trotter. Now that wasn't part of this study, and I haven't heard that before. How much space is it consistent?
All I'll say is way too much space. It's like the opposite. It's that school is at about 50% occupancy right now.
The school population's gone down that much.
And I think there was it was overbuilt to begin with. In any projections you look at on where enrollment may go, even if you have a spike in certain grades, it's amazingly empty.
So you could take that annex, the classrooms that are labeled A, and put something in that whole 2-floor building? You know, the part that's past the gym?
It's right here.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, no one's modeled anything, but there's a significant amount of space, and the school administration acknowledges that very openly. And it can be cordoned off too, which is why
Right.
I know Tim reminds me every time we talk about the South Union topic. That's not a permanent space, don't get me wrong, Tim, but there's certainly a space where you may be in a better spot temporarily, with a longer term, obviously, path, depending on where we go with this. But that's just an option that hasn't been talked. You're right, Jen, it hasn't been talked about that
That's a
much.
big deal.
Yeah, whenever you're dealing with some of this, you're gonna have transition time too, right? I know no one wants to see that. I know Tim's department, and I think if Sarah Castle was here from Youth and Family, she'd say the same thing. They've moved around a lot, right? And but naturally that happens, right? And even Pam, right, gave a history of all the buildings she's been in.
How much square foot is available in Trotter, do you know? How
It all
square,
depend on, well, that school administration topic creeps back in too, right? If you have to get them out of Neary sooner rather than later for other reasons, right? Construction there,
Mhm.
but it would definitely be in the tens of thousands. I have a report that we did, the committee that Kathy Cook, Katura Martin, and I were on last year, where we analyzed the school enrollment to lead up to the MSBA process. That's what really informed that conclusion. Like, if you look at building occupancy versus the number of people in the building, staff and students, that's a startling number.
This is slightly off top, not exactly off topic, but when we were talking about moving Neary and Woodward and schools around, is there any reason why we couldn't put 5th grade into Trotter if that's one of the concerns?
There were a few people really pushing that with the superintendent during that subcommittee. 5th grade could certainly fit. There's absolutely no question about that. But from a developmental perspective, it was strongly recommended not to go down that road, because you think about, I don't have a 5th grader yet, but 5th grader versus an 8th grader, I think there's just a huge
world of difference.
It's a big difference.
So
Yeah,
so
It's a big difference.
but look, I think they're
I've got one
open.
of those.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say I've got a 5th grader right now.
Yeah.
And I do see the difference, but I know there's a number of towns all over Massachusetts. Is it even 50-50 where middle school is 5th through 8th grade? And I'm not saying it's the best, but there's definitely a lot of precedent for it in Massachusetts.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at our current configuration of elementary schools, right? At some point in time, everyone thought it was a great idea to have K and 1 together, 2 and 3 together, and 4 and 5 together. And I think that might be the one unifying thing in this town that people don't agree with, right? In terms of, right, all the transit. So I think it's evolving. Look, but I think that's a really good point. Susan, I don't think it's off topic, because that goes to compromise, right? As this all comes to fruition, every grade you add to Neary is going to add to the cost of what we're looking at there. I thought you were going to ask about Finn, which I think
That's
is
my question, actually.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, like, I guess I look at Woodward and like, it's our nicest school building, right? So it's a little bit hurts to take it offline as a school and then spend all the money to retrofit it. But I was wondering about Finn, as I've spent a lot of time in that Finn school with little kids, and just like, I mean, if there was one, I mean, yes, I know Neary needs work too, but like, if we could shuffle grades around, or if Neary was built bigger, I'd almost prefer you take Finn and move them up to Woodward, give them the nice new building, and then look at like the Finn space with all the fields there and the complex. And like, we've talked a lot with ADA about how do we get walking paths down there and stuff like that. Like, there could be something more there that would allow us to potentially custom build senior center and rec center together.
I thought there was enough space in Woodward to put another grade in there, though.
It basically, if you took grade 2 or grade 5 and moved it to Woodward today, you'd be 2 people over like the occupancy permit. So there's a lot of space in Woodward, but there isn't. Like there's, right, each grade is somewhere between 80 and 120 kids in Southborough these days. So it'd be very tight, but I'm not totally discounting Finn. I'll be completely honest, right? Based on the work that subcommittee did, here's the main reason we left Finn as a school for now until the state tells us, right, as part of the MSBA process, we need to deviate, or the town with all these other needs, is Finn is designed for little kids. Think about simple things like bathroom setup and how accessible the bathrooms are to the classroom, versus Woodward is set up with, a more traditional setup, like they're in the middle of the hallway sort of thing. That's a bigger deal than I think any of one of us want to acknowledge. And part two is because of the parcel that exists at Finn, if we're ever wrong, let's just say we build or renovate Neary too small, and all of a sudden you have all this development in Southborough that no one saw coming, Finn has the ability to expand. Woodward, we all know you can't go anywhere. So that was one of the competing factors, but I'm not willing to totally discount it yet if we can't find the right path as a community, because I do think it would be an excellent community center, and allow you to partition off spaces and everyone could have their own space, with obviously some of these common features somewhere in the middle. Has a gym, has a commercial kitchen, all one story. It would resolve at least some of the things I've heard tonight. Go ahead, Tim.
So this is for Tim Davis. We talked a little bit about this before, but the question for the rec center more so. Seems like there's a huge opportunity to be closer to the schools, like possibly on the same campus as a school. Would that simplify the stuff that the rec center community is doing, or would it complicate things being with the adult programs and trying to push further into that space, being on the same campus as an actual school? Because it seems like your primary focus is younger kids right now, and I don't know a ton about everything that goals and aspirations are, or what you guys support today.
It's a good question. I think that a consideration that needs to be had is the fact that it's still a school and that we're still governed by the unions and the policies and the procedures of the schools. So even if we were in the school, hypothetically, and yes, we want to do an after-hour program with the gymnasium or something like that, we would still need to pay a school union custodian, whether that be their rate or an overtime rate or something like that. So I think the access is good, but I don't think it would solve us trying to pivot and trying to weasel our way in to get space, to get coverage with custodians, to like Jen mentioned, the fact extended day is in all the schools as well, trying to jockey for space with there. So proximity wise, I think it makes some things a lot easier and a lot more fluid, but at the same time, there would still be barriers, I think, up against us, financially and with access. So it's kind of double-edged.
Okay, yeah, because my bigger thought for the group was, if the rec center was, say, a separate building that's part of the Neary rebuild that the town would take on as a new build, I saw that there could be an opportunity to be either separate on the same parcel of land, connected to the school with, its own piece, like its own separate area. Seeing what some of the programs were when I was there, that there's no commute times and whatnot between the pieces, which is kind of maybe counter to a community center, but it seemed like it would work efficiently for what you guys are doing. But that's just my quick perception of what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Jen.
I was just gonna say that I think like to bring to life like like Tim says, like Tim has a great relationship with the school and does all he can to get scheduling in there. But there are some beloved programs that like we were planning to run or wanted to run, and then something changed and the school needed that room, or the school needed that auditorium that we've had to cancel or we can't run. And like we have very upset parents and very upset kids that can't do those things. So it's just it's challenging to keep up like such high level of programming when we do not know what rooms we get in 6 weeks, right? We're waiting to hear what they're going to allow us to use. So, and I think, and that's the relationship of that the school owns the building and that they're allowing us to use it like they don't have to. So I think that's some of the challenges. And I know we've noodled around like unofficially talking about Neary as well, but as Neary looks to expand their footprint, we're now talking about potentially losing fields for soccer and baseball and things like that, which also is another big concern for rec in the community, is that we have just barely enough fields to get by today. So expanding that footprint and building more over on Neary means we're losing lots of potential soccer field space as well. So
I think you'd be going vertical, so don't lose
okay,
sight.
good. That would be good.
And I think you might get upgraded facilities if done right. It just may not be in the same spot they're at right now. Can I ask a question for Jen or Tim? You can take this. What is the one feature that you need the most that you don't have currently access to in your current space, whether it be self-union or access to some of these buildings that you don't control?
Like dream. Like
Yeah.
if I had one pick, it'd be a gymnasium, obviously.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
And as my kids have gotten a little older and like I'm starting to see other communities space, it seems like most don't actually use their schools. They have these like separate, like, I don't know, especially basketball, right? Like every time I'm in like looks like an old warehouse, right? That's just full of insulation and like 10 courts strung along.
Yep.
Are those all privately owned? Like there's more
Yeah.
education for me.
Yeah.
And like, these town sports leagues are just, contracting with whoever owns those.
They're paying
Paying
for
a
it. Yep.
lot of money to rent them. Yes.
Yeah.
But that's not discouraging these folks from signing their kids up for youth sports, right? So it might go to where we go with Tim Fling on the public-private partnership later on, if he has any updates for us, but there's more educational.
Is that more expensive? Just out of curiosity, with what you just mentioned, is that more expensive than what is being offered through our rec center? Like, is there any experience between what Jason just mentioned about that renting private space to do these activities and their cost implications for people that are using it?
So
I don't
it's
understand your question.
for like a user group. So
Oh.
yes, it's more expensive for a user group to go outside of Southborough and rent space. Because everyone charges non-residents more money, right? And then the rec, we give great rates for the local teams and stuff like that. Or it's like a lot of it's pass through. Or like we collect a little bit of extra fee and it goes right back into like mowing the fields and stuff like that. I do know like a couple of years ago when we had EEE and you couldn't be outside on the fields, all of soccer moved indoor to rent private indoor space and it was extremely expensive. Like burned through all the money that they had and like we couldn't have soccer practice as many times a week because we couldn't afford it, right? Yeah, so that's where like, and even like when when groups asked if they can have the indoor gymnasiums at the schools for like small events, or they want for shorter time periods, there are minimums to rent it and you have to pay for the custodian to work, extra hours overtime to come in, and there's minimums. So it gets really expensive for shorter periods or smaller events. So that's why like basketball, like we'll string together back to back to back to back because then they clean once afterwards. So I know like Cub Scouts will come looking and wanting to know if they can have the Finn Gym for an event, and it's extremely expensive to do something like that for something small. So,
And we deal with it now. I mean, we rent space at St. Mark's, we rent it at Fay. If we have to go to Algonquin, they charge us ungodly rates for the gymnasiums, things like that. So and they're lower than what private is. So it's kind of, no matter where you go, if you're not the home base, you're getting charged for it. So.
I'm sure you also have users who don't want to go that far outside Southborough.
Yeah.
Too, right? Because I mean, I work with you guys a little bit more in the past couple of years, and we've heard that feedback here.
Mhm.
So
We ready to pivot to library? Okay,
Sure.
Ryan,
I mean, this is similar to I think recreation. The board did not take a formal vote. Most of their discussions were back when I think they were participating in the initial conversations. I do think an interesting idea that was kind of pitched after was there seemed to be some interest is if the library were to get all of Woodward, which I don't think wasn't one of the options that was presented. But that was a question that was definitely asked by more than one of the trustees.
I've received a lot of calls about that one from your trustees, because I know they couldn't deliberate in a meeting because it wasn't on the agenda at the time. But that was certainly the theme I walked away with, which is intriguing to an extent.
So I don't, I think, again, they've kind of been focused more on the construction grant program and filing the letter of intent. I don't know if you want to add anything, Janet. I don't know that there's much more to say.
No, I've asked for direction. I've said, if they're not willing to compromise on a number of different things, then I didn't need to be on this committee. If I was going to put this amount of time in, I'd kind of like, to know that they were open to all these options, and, got resounding silence. So the only strong feeling I get is that people seem to want a one facility, like all of the rest of you, a one facility thing. They're concerned about staffing and availability and all sorts of things of either breaking up the functions or trying to do a satellite. So it does seem like we need one location. That's the only consistent thing I get from people.
So Janet, just to make sure we're clear, because that's a little different than, so just for everyone's knowledge, the architect tried to get really creative on the space needs study, right? And pitched a bunch of options that did not have all of the library functions together in the same building. I think one iteration that stands out in my mind, they had the children's library in the Woodward Library, but kept the rest of the library at the existing infrastructure. Right, like that was met with a resounding no from an operational perspective by Ryan. The library board obviously shared that.
It's a beautiful space.
Yeah,
it is.
But I just want to make sure everyone had that perspective, because they were really trying hard, but I think they got just like too creative at a point on some of that. How do you know? And if not, ask when the next board meeting. How does the board feel about co-location with other user groups? Right. So just to give an order of magnitude, the Woodward facility is 70,000 square feet. You, the library, need somewhere plus or minus 20,000 square feet, I think, based on all the data that you previously provided. You didn't even go up to 25.
Or more.
Right?
More.
Fine, call it 25 for my example.
Okay.
Right? Like, you're not going to need the whole building from a Woodward perspective. We heard from Bill, his committee took a resounding, we really aren't interested in sharing space sort of thing. Does the library have a view on sharing with other users? If all of your ideal operational needs are met and you're under the same roof?
I don't think we don't have a position.
Yeah, I think we would have to pose that question, Jason. I think it would be much better to have a scenario of kind of what the sharing entities would be. There is a lot of synergy. Like I mentioned, we work a lot closer with the recreation department now than we did pre-COVID. I always want to work more with Pam, but we're kind of on, I see a lot of the seniors, because when the senior center closes, they kind of come to the library, right? So, I'm kind of seeing a lot of the same people that she is. I think there's some synergy and some cross connection, you know, when Youth and Family was kind of looking for a home before they found South Union, Sarah participated like kind of earlier in her tenure as director, discussions about library space and about whether or not it would even be feasible for youth and family offices to be in the library. And there wasn't space for that then. There definitely isn't now. I mean, I think if there were options, Jason, I think the trustees would consider it.
Yeah.
But I can't speak for them. I think the more specific we can get about what departments we'd be in a building with, the better.
Yeah. But I think there's also an access question, this similar to the seniors issue with Woodward. You know, it's hard trekking, you know, all the children's programs and stuff. It's hard trekking kids in strollers and all that. You know, it's the same issue as people with limited mobility. If you get two little kids, it's limited mobility. So, and also the seniors are, you know, again, access the library quite a bit as well. So similar kind of concerns.
Understood. Okay. Any questions for the library? All right. Let's move to public-private partnership research. Tim, I think you had volunteered to run with this. Any updates or next steps?
Yeah, so I met with Sam Stivers and Kathy Cook and asked them what their what they thought this meant for us to take away. And at the end of the day, it's they kind of pointed me back towards Wellesley, who has a deal where the town owns the land and there's a 50-year lease with a private group, and that private group then came in and built this the community center area, and it's run by a private group, but you know, for the town, for the town use type of thing. Kathy offered to help us set up a tour. She knows, I guess, a person that runs the place, and she'd be willing to help get our eyes onto the space and see how they're utilizing it and how the relationship is working. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what that private partnership thing is, where the town owns a piece of land, they run it back to a business, the business comes in, builds a thing that maintains it, and then it's there for the whole town's use. During this conversation, I learned a lot about some other things about this committee that I wasn't clear about from the beginning, so I think it's useful to share during this as well. And that this committee is mostly for the rec center, the senior center, and the library. Town offices are only on the Woodward plans because there was extra space on the plans. So I didn't really realize that from the beginning, and it caused me a lot of confusion. So when I kind of heard it from them, I found that to be really useful information, that though the town offices are not a thing that we're necessarily looking at, but if there is functional space that's in excess of what we, in any area that we found, whether it's Woodward or other, then it would be something that could fit into there to help consolidate other aspects of town, but it is absolutely not something that is a community center requirement. So I thought that was useful.
Sorry if that wasn't clear, Tim. That would be completely outside the bounds of a community center.
Yeah, so that was something that I didn't fully understand coming into this. So I'm glad that I did get some clarity there. Because it's in a lot of the plans, right? Every plan we look at so far, it's in there that there's town offices. So since it's a common theme, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you got to remember that was like capital planning was looking at all needs. And then because we prioritize these three groups that obviously have representatives here, that's why you kind of have that natural divide. I think we can all tell there will be space in Woodward if that is the option we go with for some of these groups. There's still going to be space that we can talk, you know, we or some other group can talk about down the road, but yeah, it's not part of our charge for the calendar year 2023.
Tim, what was that Wellesley facility used for?
So it's the Boston Sport Institute, and I haven't had much time to look it up to see exactly how it's set up over there, but Boston Sport Institute is the is the location that was referred to in Wellesley.
So it's more of a recreation center than a senior center or a library.
I believe so,
community
yeah.
center.
Without me fully looking into it and getting into the details of it, I believe that's what it is mostly a recreation center.
Yeah, I just Googled it and it looks like Wellesley has a 13,000 foot separate senior center.
Some other things that I found interesting from this, or places to look at too, we discussed was like New England Sports Center and Fort Kicks. Those are some other local locations that have, they're more recreation facilities than anything else, but they could be some inspiration to look from, see what they're doing. I would imagine, Tim, you probably have some experience with some of those kind of places nearby, and you would know more than some of us about what those are doing and how they could be utilized as a private partnership kind of opportunity for the town. They also gave us some locations that could be potential ideas in town to think about that I just didn't know. Stony Brook, which is the old Collender Airfield behind Meadow Lane. There's some land back there that is currently not buildable by some standards, so I'm not sure what could be opened up there, but there's some opportunity there to be pursued. The EMC campus over on Route 9, they're trying to sell that whole campus. So might be an opportunity there as land. These are just inspirations for us to kind of think about what is available off the cuff for any of our discussions that we're having. Compassos on Framingham Road, the old farm stand farm area there. There's some land there that's been sitting vacant for a while. The current senior center location and a fringe effort is the Park Central land, if that land would not turn into a housing complex area. But something else they did bring up is the idea that there's Park Central and another 40B project that are in the works. So any locations that would possibly work for this might need extra capacity if those two projects would go forward, including the school system.
Happy to be proven wrong on this down the road, Tim, but my understanding on the Stony Brook golf course is you don't have the ability to add any bathrooms. There's some septic issue there. I don't know, Jen, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, we've poked at that before, and yes, and that's like a big reason why it's been sitting there. Yep.
They're basically trying to give it away, and I don't think anyone's bought it.
Right, because you can't do anything. So, yep.
Okay, so those are just some ideas of areas that could be useful locations. The last thing that Sam Stivers brought up was that there was trusts that are available. I'd have to go back to them because my notes were not specific enough, and I know Sam's in the audience, so Sam, if you'd want to correct me on any of this, please feel free to chime in. But there's trusts available, and there's people in Southborough that are wealthy that could form an endowment for a location. So Sam was pushing the idea to try to find something where you could bring somebody in that would like to be philanthropic and have them help fund something as an endeavor, or use some of the trusts that are available towards some of these endeavors. But I would have to go talk to Sam again about that because he was pretty happy, but we didn't talk extensively about it.
The other parcel I'll just throw out there is the area behind the transfer station, which I believe Jen mentioned, related to the senior center. That was explored for a police station in the last 10 years. And it was mainly we moved on because we decided to do the fire station too. So there wasn't enough land, and there's obviously kind of one-way access there because of Route 9, because you don't have a light coming out on the backside on Middle Road. But it's a pretty large parcel with decent access.
I think aren't there some wetland areas there too that might make it an issue. I did kind of already start looking at that, and I know Rec has
Yeah.
in the past also considered that as well.
Yeah, it keeps coming up and people keep saying that, but for what it's worth, there are plans. I think they might still be kicking around the rec office that were drawn up that showed you could put in we could build a building big enough for an indoor sports field. Like not 11v11 regulation, but we could get a decent sized field in there along with programming rooms and stuff like that. So
Jason, can I share my screen? I'll just bring it up.
Hang on, I gotta give you access. And we also could fit a police station very comfortably with all the security, right? So multiple different, totally different uses. You wouldn't be able to build something for everyone, but it doesn't sound like anyone wants that anyways, right? So.
Yeah. Everybody see that?
Mhm.
Okay. Very old drawing, as you tell, because it looks like a drawing, but yeah, the idea is there.
So there is access from Middle Road.
There is, that's actually where your access is, or through the back of the dump.
Yeah.
Just for reference.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
Um,
Can I just say something too, Jason? I guess I'm not doing my job if I don't push back on that idea of a private part, of public-private. Because if an institution like a BSI or something came in, it would it would render us obsolete in some areas. So I would be hesitant in trying to strike a deal to have some private company come in and build something that people like me only dream of at some point in our lives. But it would pull all of our business away. So I would have incredible concern if we went down that path.
and in fairness to Tim, right, we were just responding to what was inserted in
Yeah.
the charge.
Yeah.
It's just I think if the Recreation Commission wants to take a stance on your statement, I don't think that would hurt, because I think we could certainly go as part of our presentation to the select board and say, this is what we're hearing. Is this really the direction you want us to go? And see if they want to refine the direction, and or do we look at what that really means?
I think
Yeah,
I think there, sorry, Jen, but I think there just might be some hesitancy for some of the boards to take votes that might, like, dependent on what ends up materializing later. I don't think people want to vote against something that might be one of the future viable options, right? And it's like, I don't know, Jason, I think part of it is keeping it open, the lines of communication open, right? So it's like, how restrictive do you want votes to be? I feel like votes are very final, but I don't know. I'm also not a member of my board. I just want to give them good advice.
So I go back to my statement at the beginning. Concessions are going to have to be made sooner rather than later, right? You're not gonna. We're going to have to start putting we have a puzzle right now that's at least 10,000 pieces, and it is scattered all over the house, so to say, right? We have to somehow bring that puzzle together. So maybe it's not a formal vote, Ryan, but it might be just a direction of, hey, do you understand this is what it means? Is that really what you want us to do? Here are the implications, sort of thing. But some part of me also is, I used the COA as an example, right? They took a very strong, passionate stance. I expected nothing less. But I imagine, just based on some of the comments from Pam and from Bill, if they're presented something back and it's the only path forward, they're going to certainly revisit it. They may still come back with the same answer. That's their right. But I do think for this committee to do our work, we have to start picking where are we going to go, right? And it's not 3 independent facilities. Or
At this point, we're at the Sears wish book stage.
Exactly.
Say, here's what we'd really like.
Yeah,
Let's go from there. We only got $3 to spend. How do we spend it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Bill,
but are we sure that we've got everybody who should be at the table? Not necessarily at the table, but I'm concerned about maybe leaving out other groups or leaving out what could be broad-based wishes of the community that don't have a particular advocate. Like how many times through the years have we heard that it'd be great to have a community swimming pool? I mean, that's just one example of a
Yeah,
thing.
so I
Yeah,
do
look at
think
Jason's face.
the master plan committee just did like a multi-year project and did a lot of that research and feedback, and like specifically a pool was discussed. So that might also be another resource to make sure it gets circulated so people can see that, because there's basically a wish list for the next like 10 to 15 years of like what a group of like 35 representatives across all walks of life from Southborough want to see happen. So I know like Recreation Commission basically has like some really clear direction as to what the community wants. So that might be a good one to circulate so others can see that, because those things are addressed there.
I think that would be great. I mean, I'd hate us to come up with solutions and find out afterwards that, you know, there's a very broad consensus of people who think we weren't asking the right questions, you know?
So I think part of this is surveying, right? If there is an appetite to survey, and I know Ryan has indicated the library has to do their own surveys anyways because of that. And then the MTC has been incredibly collaborative in terms of they have all these survey tools and want to help. But I guess a good place to start, Jen, based on your master plan comment, is there's an implementation committee that's basically implementing the master plan.
Yes.
I would think we would want them to come and say, these are the things you should be thinking about based on this. One of the things in the master plan, if I remember, is a formation of this committee. If I remember, is actually a master plan goal. So I can certainly reach out to them. I think Lisa's the chair of that. I know Mimi Luttrell was very involved, so I'll reach out to them to see that. But Jen, how would
the
you
master
go?
plan is published on the town website, isn't it?
It is.
So we should,
It is.
we should be looking at that.
Jen, how would you go about figuring out to make sure we're not leaving someone out? Is it an educational letter saying this is what we're starting to do? Raise your hand if you have ideas or thoughts of broadening it. Any thoughts there?
Youth and Family Services comes up as one I would think maybe might be interested in a community effort.
I feel like that like SYFS has come up a lot in the discussions, only because they're so much part of Rec and South Union, right? So yeah, I mean, Bill, that's kind of, I had the same thought.
Okay.
The other is veterans. They're kind of isolated at this point.
And you think that would be the veterans agent or someone like a Steve Wynot, Dan Kalenda in their respective groups?
I was thinking the veterans agent. We just want to make sure that we don't forget about them.
Okay.
Do they still
So
have
I
office
wonder-
space at the senior center? Do they still have the office space at the senior center, the VA, the veterans agent?
Pam just went off camera, but I think they're at the cemetery building.
Oh, you're right, they are. That's right, Jason. They are.
I guess I would also say that the bigger this committee gets, the harder it is to get quorum and harder it is to meet, versus I'd almost rather, if we get some sort of draft or something, let's then invite them in to have a conversation and get their live feedback. Otherwise it just gets really hard to do any of these things from experience.
And I think what we
Doesn't
could
mean it's
do,
not the right way to go, though, you know?
why don't I reach out to Sarah and whoever's currently sitting as chair of youth and family and just see if they have a strong opinion. They may say, keep us informed, or they may say, we really want to see at the table. If they want to see at the table, then that's going to be up to the select board to take action on. I know just from my personal experience on the last go around on this for capital, they were very happy getting the updates and being looped in and listening, as long as we were listening to their considerations, but their square footage is much less than anything we've talked about with any of these user groups here. It's a fraction, even as their services obviously continue to grow.
Even if these groups just knew that the committee exists and here's our schedule of meetings and you can watch, I don't think they necessarily want to sit and have a vote. I
Okay.
could be wrong, but
All right, so you
I
think
mean, I've mentioned this committee to a couple different people that I would have thought absolutely knew about it and had no idea. So,
does anyone want to take like, I don't know whether it's a letter to the blog or just something we post on the website, like take a stab at, hey, we've just started. I don't know, Bill used some pretty good term of where we're at, pie in the sky sort of stuff, but like, we're meeting on a regular basis. Our meetings are public. You can watch the replay, just like a basic, hey, we're not doing this in the dark sort of thing. So that when the first plan comes out, people aren't like, what just happened?
right.
You may hate this idea, Jason, so feel free to push back, but what if there's like a standing agenda item kind of at the end where, I mean, essentially it's public comment, but like you phrase it like community input. So like then there would be a space for Sarah, like if there were implications on a potential project. I mean, I think the thing that I keep going back to is like, what if one of the proposals is like the disposition of South Union, right? Because that's a very real long-term possibility, right? So like that's going to affect SYFS, right, long-term. So then Sarah might want to comment in a meeting if that's one of the proposals. So I'm just saying there might be, that would be a great way, I think, to engage with the veterans agent too. So it's not like, I mean, again, I think you can use your discretion as chair as to whether or not you want them to give input before that, but if it's on the agenda as like a community input thing, I mean, that opens you up to community input from everybody, so that's consideration.
I used the video I sent around to everyone. I don't remember how many committees had quorum that night when we presented it. Like, unfortunately, if you want anything to pass, like I don't care who you're representing, we need that community input. So I'd rather like just take it on the chin,
Get
right?
it early. Yeah.
Take the, that's how we make a better proposal that will actually pass, because otherwise we're all wasting our time. So I like the idea, Ryan. I have public comment. I can broaden it. Again, I'd rather hear it up front. We may or may not change gears as part of the feedback, but at least someone will be able to say they heard it.
If I'll take a stab at drafting a notice to send out if we want to do that. Put it on my Southborough and library
That works.
info and all that. Okay. I'll take a stab at it and send it to you, Jason.
Yeah, or depending on when we decide on our next meeting, we can just take a look at it together. Up to the committee of whether they want to review it or just kind of have two of us run with it. I'm not hearing a strong opinion, so Janet, we'll see how quickly you get it done.
I trust you guys.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking for the next meeting, and it dives into 8 because I would like to wrap us up. We obviously have a vendor we can start to work through iterations, which would include potential high-level costing of, hey, if everyone got what they wanted in isolation, this is what it looks like, and then start to come up with configurations from there. But I think we need a meeting to discuss what configurations we want to see. And I think everyone, especially those that haven't been part of this, need to digest, all right, I heard what the seniors said, I heard what recreation said, I heard what the library said, here's what I'd like to see. And I don't want to predispose potential options and throw them out here. I'd like to have everyone kind of think about that in between the next 2 meetings and see if we can't land on a consensus. And then my intention would be, if we have, let's just say we come up with a top 5, I'm not wed to that number, I'm just throwing it out as an example. Then we go to the vendor and say, here are potential iterations we're thinking about. A, do you have any others that you would think about? And B, what could you do and what is the cost? I'm purposely not going to tell you the amount of money that we have sitting for this, because they can watch this meeting too, right? And I don't want to negotiate against ourselves. So just know that there is money that town meeting has approved in the past that is available to fund exactly what I'm discussing. But as much as all of us are experts in our own way, I feel like we need a third party. And I think part of what I think we can do as a committee is if their quote and or expertise doesn't seem to line up with where we want to go, then we can take a step back and say, is this the right vendor to move forward with this on, or do we need some other expertise that they're not bringing to the table at this point? What does everyone think about that?
Sounds like a way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, so do we want to shoot for after town meeting at this point? Because if we went 2 weeks from today, we'd be the week of town meeting, right? I think. Hang on.
Yeah.
Please after, please.
Yeah, all right. So is Wednesday still, Nikki, we didn't really get your weigh in of whether Wednesday's work or not, but we kind of accidentally landed on this night, if I remember correctly. So remind me, we said what nights are in or out? I think
Wednesday's good for me.
Wednesdays are good for me.
If we could, not to be that one guy, but could we not do the second Wednesday? Because that is when I'm typically in the Friends meetings.
Well,
how about we do Wednesday, March 29th? Because the following week is Passover. I'm not sure if that impacts anyone. And then you start running into school vacation that, so then we'd be able to go like right after school vacation as like our next sequence of meetings. So does anyone have any objections to Wednesday, the 29th at this point?
So the Wednesday after town meeting, that's a good way to think of it.
Correct.
I have a suggestion in that I would really like to have this committee see the senior center. And I'm wondering if we could have our meeting at the senior center. Would that work? Would that make sense?
I don't know where I know some people were traveling, et cetera, so I'll let others weigh in. There is a ability to do a hybrid. I just know the senior center is unfortunately the least equipped at this point for that.
A hybrid, right. I'd like to show
I would
I'd like-
imagine a lot of us have seen a lot of the senior center.
But some of you haven't. That the problem is, or the thing in my mind is that some of you haven't and don't realize what we do there and the services and the activities that we have.
All
and,
right.
and the limitations that we have.
So how about this? Anyone that has not frequently visited the senior center, is not aware of the services, or has not walked through Pam's office to get to the other, that's what I think of every time, Pam, sorry.
Bridge.
Can everyone please just make a commitment, if you haven't toured the inner workings of the senior center and the library and South Union before the next meeting, can you arrange with the various department heads here to see them? I'm not calling, everyone knows what they have or haven't done, right? And then it's on me still to also try to get into Woodward before that time. That can be more of a group setting. We just won't be able to deliberate anything on the fly. It won't be a posted meeting or anything like that. So want to hear back.
I am at the library on Saturday. I'm just gonna offer this, and I was gonna reach out to you, Tim, because I am here this Saturday, and just offer to take you around. If anybody is available Saturday, I will have some time to do that. So a bit, Bill, I know you've been at the library before, and Nikki, I know you have too. But if you guys, I think Susan and Jen will tell you, and Jason, if you want to come at some point.
You know how many
I know
times
you're
I've been
sk-
through that building?
Yeah, I know, right? But it just, I think Jen and Susan saw some areas they probably had never seen before. It would take like 10 minutes. We can talk more if you want, but it's not a long tour.
This Saturday? This Saturday, okay.
Yeah, and I'm here other Saturdays, but we'd be looking at after town meeting.
Mhm.
Bill, what's your contact information? Because you said your town email isn't really getting to you.
It's
So
Banjo.
I'll save you. Tim, it should be in the CC on the email I sent it out. So he doesn't have to give his email on a public live meeting. I'll send it. If you can't find it, let me know and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Can't find it, Tim. Send me an email and I'll get it to you.
That's the problem, Bill, but okay.
All right. Is there any public comment? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, roll call. Bill,
Aye.
Jen,
Yes.
Janet,
Aye.
Tim,
Aye.
Susan,
Yes.
Nikki,
I
and Jason is aye. Have a good evening. Thanks for the good discussion tonight.
thank you.
Tim.
Bye-bye.
Bye, have a good